pronounced differences between the flavors in addition to just the color. In Canada, you can add some coloring, some grain neutral spirits, all this other stuff, which is like really high proof grain alcohol, everything, so on and so forth. And that's what American distillers did for a very long time, really up until the 80s or 90s. You take real whiskey like this, add a bunch of really high proof pure alcohol to it to get the proof up, and then water it back down and put it in the barrel, or put it in the bottle, and sell it. It just tasted awful. And right now, starting in the 80s, Buffalo Trace, they released Flames, which was the first single barrel bourbon anybody commercially released back in 1984. And they followed that up with Elmer Two and a few others in the following years. And then Jim Beam started making small batch bourbons with Booker's, Baker's, Knott Creek, and Basil Hayden's. Those were all Jim Beam whiskeys they introduced in the early 90s. They've really been going back to this style of whiskey that goes back, for us, several hundred years, and overall in the world for really good 1,000 years, bringing this great tradition back. So it's a very exciting time for the world of whiskey. All of these shelves right here, if it was about 30 years ago, I could fit every bourbon you could get on 2 shelves back there, which is very, very sad to think. You went from 1,000 distilleries just from Pennsylvania to maybe 30 labels being around through the 80s. So now we're getting back to real whiskey, what this is. And before we taste it, the way that you make this stuff, which is kind of cool, real whiskey, because I keep on calling it real whiskey, just as what that is, it's very simple stuff. It's pretty straightforward. Any spirit that you make, whether it's gin, vodka, whiskey, whatever it is, it'll all start off as a beer or a wine, one or the other. And what you do with this stuff, bourbon particularly, and rye, is you take those grains and you put them in this big tank and you get them wet. You let them break down just a little bit. You add some yeast to it, and that yeast will convert all the sugar in the grain over into alcohol. You get about 10% beer out of that. And from there, you put it in a still and you heat it up to where the alcohol evaporates, and not much else does. And that's where you start getting up to the 100 proof stuff, 100 to 140 proof whiskey. And then you put that in a barrel and you just sit and you wait. And you wait some more because it takes a long time. There's no way to get around it. And in the end, what you get is this stuff that we have sitting in front of us right now, which is really cool. For me, the steps of it, you can't tell the yeast what to do. You just put it in there and it does its little thing, and you hope it does it right. And you put it in barrels and you can't change anything about the barrels outside how hot and how full it gets, and that's it. And you crack these barrels open 10 years later and you hope that they're good. So it's a really cool thing. There's a lot of interesting things going on that you can't really control. And that's kind of one of the things that I really enjoy. When you get done with that whole process, this is what you end up with. The first whiskey that we'll be tasting today is this Old Forester Birthday Bourbon. This will be going from left to right. It should start at the little hole in the stage. Yeah, this is a really cool label. This guy, the Old Forester Company, got started by a guy named George Garvin Brown a very, very long time ago. He was actually the first guy to ever bottle a bourbon at a distillery. And he did this because he was selling a lot of whiskey out west, and when you ship it in barrels, people just pull the cork out, take a bunch of whiskey out of it, and then fill it back up with water or whatever. So you didn't know if you were getting proof or even if it was all whiskey. People would put paint in it back.
That'd be a real good drink.
Yeah, that's right. The rectified whiskey is what they call it. They can rectify anything. But anyway, so George Garvin Brown, his label Old Forester is the only bourbon that was distilled before, during, and after Prohibition, which is a really cool thing.
Is that real expensive?
Actually, the regular Old Forester is not. It's still really inexpensive. It's an 8-year-old bourbon, which is kind of old for American whiskey. It typically peaks between 4 and 8 years in America. And after that, it generally just tends to get bad. It's kind of hard. This is a 12-year bourbon. Kind of hard to get it past 10 or 12 years. It gets pretty difficult to do. But this whiskey is released every year on George's birthday.
Birthday.
The birthday bourbon, right? Yeah, early September.
Happy birthday!
Birthday bourbon appropriate.
You know what's a day for you? Every bourbon's birthday.
But they do this, and this is a really cool bourbon. They'll actually pick 1 day's worth of distilling. They'll go through and pick out a set of barrels that were all distilled on 1 day, so it's a true vintage bourbon. And for this one, because they're all different, each year they do a different one intentionally. They keep it very different year to year. There's always just really good, fun, different stuff that they have there. These are the same guys, Brown Foreman, George Garvin Brown's company, now pretty big. They own Old Forester, Woodford Reserve, and a little distillery in Tennessee called Jack Daniels, which is a place. It's the same guy making the whiskey for all these guys. Chris Morris is his name. He's the master of Woodford Reserve and Old Forester.
So he gets Jack Daniels too?
he has some input on it. There's a separate master over at that distillery. Each one really has their own thing, but Chris, at least for bourbon, is the big guy up here. And Tennessee whiskey, Jack Daniels, is really bourbon, follows all the rules that bourbon does, except you filter it through sugar, maple, charcoal. That's the only difference between Tennessee whiskey and bourbon. Makes whiskey a little bit lighter, a little bit sweeter. This bourbon particularly, this year's, is one of the best bottlings I've ever done this. I bought like 4 bottles for my house. So
Left to right?
yeah, left to right. And what you'll notice on this, a lot of times, we've got some spring water set up on the table, and we'll have some ice coming over in just a second, in case anybody wants to add a cube of ice or anything, just like that to tone it down. But for tasting these spirits, because the proof is quite a bit higher than beer or wine, it's a little bit different from what you do there. The first thing that most people do, a master distiller, when he goes through this day's work, is walking through hundreds and hundreds of barrels of whiskey and opening all of them and checking them to see how they're coming along. Terrible job.
That's a job he wanted.
Yeah, that's not a bad gig at all, I gotta say.
Doing it every day.
So every now and then, every few weeks, I'll wake up and be like, oh wait, yeah, no, that's good. That's all right. But what they'll do, they'll only taste a few bourbons that they actually go through and check. They'll smell the nose of the spirit, any kind of spirit. It is a little bit more difficult. The proof really wants to kind of light your nose hairs on fire. So if you open your mouth and breathe in through your mouth and your nose, like that, it really gives you a wonderful character of what's in here. And this bourbon particularly, a lot of the things you'll pick out, this bourbon is a 12-year-old bourbon, and what they did special with this one was actually an accident, which I think has some great history of bourbons. It's all accidental through. They put way too much malt barley in this stuff. And all bourbon is going to be mostly corn, primarily corn whiskey. Has to be 51% corn more than beer. And usually what you do, and what these guys do, is you do a whole lot of corn, a little bit of rye, and a teeny little bit of malt barley. Malt barley is extremely expensive. It's by far the most expensive grain you use in there. And in bourbon, you use it primarily just as an enzyme. It makes this enzyme that turns the starch in the grain over to sugar. And that lets the yeast do its thing. So you need a little bit of malt barley. The grain operator this day put way too much malt barley in there. Which makes great whiskey, but I'm sure he was fired. I'm sure it was probably a tens of thousands of dollars mistake. So on that day, they decided to keep it. And this is a very old style of whiskey. They used to use a lot more malt barley back in the day, and this will taste like that. So the big things you get out of here, out of all bourbon, you'll get a lot of honey, caramel, and vanilla. Those are the big flavors you get out of bourbon whiskey, and American whiskey in general, but particularly bourbon. Real warm, sweet whiskey compared to a lot of the other styles that you get. This one, you get some nice nutty flavors coming out of it, kind of like Woodford. I know we got some Woodford fans in the house, so another reason to pick this. This is phenomenal stuff. The nice and big and sweet up front, a little bit of spice on the back end as it hits the back of your tongue, the back of your palate. That rye grain kicks in, gives you that pepper and spice. But it's really, most people, when you grow up drinking this stuff, the way I was taught to drink it, you either put it in Coke, or you took shots of it until you fell down, one or the other. And I never really realized. Right? Yeah, I know. It's got some hop to it.
So you're from Brown County?
Yeah, exactly. I never really appreciated it. I mean, it's like almost like candy in a glass. I mean, those toffees and caramels, those big sweet flavors, are really the big thing that come out of this. It makes for a beautiful spirit. So that's the first one we're tasting. Is Old Forester Birthday Bourbon from the last year, 2012. Really good stuff. This is one of my favorite bourbons from last year. I put this in my top 5. So, cheers.
Now, can I ask you, is the color of the bourbon, I know you said it was aged, but they didn't mean to, but is it also because they fired the inside of the barrel?
That's completely it. And